Hi there, and welcome to this video. You're here to learn more about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski, and I'm going to teach you everything I know. In today's video, what we're taking a look at are the options that you have on portals, and we want to know everything there is about how portals control what we can see. So hang in there, and we'll be on my desktop in just a few. Alrighty, so for today we are taking a look at portals and all of the options that we have. Now in this video I'm using a copy of FileMaker 16, and if you have an older version or a newer version, likelihood is everything that I show you is going to work going all the way back to FileMaker 13, well 14, 15 maybe added a few features to the portal, but for the most part things have been pretty much the same. If you'd like to follow along, I have put down in the description below, or wherever it is, it should be below, a link to a Dropbox file where you can follow along. Now I'm going to give a very quick overview of what we've done. If you'd like to follow along and recreate the file as we go through this, which is always good practice and experience, you can click this option of a new solution and then basically just call it whatever you want. So I already have the file open here, and we've been using this same file for the past few lessons, I think for 2 now. At least the previous lesson to this one, lesson 5, where we talked about actually setting up relationships. When we were in the define database, we were looking at relationships, how things were set up. We've gone through all of the ways that I use colors and so forth. Yesterday's lesson was a really big lesson about using a join table. So now that we've got a join table in the scenario, and we're structuring our data, we've got 2 different entities in our example. We've got people, and those people are attending events. And formerly we had them directly connected to each other, which is not what we want because it's not the most optimal solution. It doesn't normalize the data, as they say. So we threw in the attendees, and now we are using a portal in order to display the data. So it goes without saying that we should know everything there is to know about portal options. Now, the first thing that we're going to learn about today is, number 1, a portal is not just for showing related data. It simply isn't. A portal, once you move past that particular mindset of on the relationship graph, okay, I'm going to have a layout, and it's going to be based on the people table occurrence, which ties to the people table. I'm then going to have an attendees join table, and that's going to be a portal. That's the colors that I use. Purple signifies a layout for me. Blue signifies that it's a portal accessible relative to the layout. So if we know that it's not just for the purpose that we just looked at, we start to think of portals in a different light. And that is, a portal is merely a display mechanism in order to display whatever you want to display. Now in this scenario that we have right here, it's going to directly display records based on the relationship that I have in place. This relationship dictates what data is going to be shown. So from the perspective of people, my ID for a given person is only going to allow that portal to display records according to matching values for that ID. So for me, only my records are going to show. That all makes sense. But once you get past that mindset, you start to think, I can use any type of field within one side of a relationship in order to display whatever I want in a portal. All there has to be is the connection between the two. So what this means is, if I wanted to show only those records of a particular type, a particular category that included a particular word, whatever it is, I can actually have the portal show those items based on how I structure a new relationship. So for example, I could very easily create a duplicate table occurrence now. I could very easily put a global field in the people table. And a global field is not going to be super heavy. It doesn't add to the size of the database. It's just a placeholder that allows you to say, I'm going to put a value in that global field that can change. It can be 2016, 2017, 2018, and it will only filter out via the relationship what is actually going to be shown from that related table. So we already have a number of items here. In this scenario, what I just explained probably wouldn't work, and here's why. We would be able to put a global field in the people table and put a value of 2016. We would be able to filter only on this table occurrence based on the data that is within this particular table. So in this case, it doesn't make sense because the relationship, I'm not able to relate here to anything that's based on that year value. Remember, the year value right now as it stands is all the way over one table away right here in the events table. So in that scenario, using the relationship to create another portal or create a filtered portal, filtering based on the relationship, wouldn't actually work. But we have a solution. Every portal that you're going to display on a layout has two different ways to filter data. The first way to filter data is via the relationship, and that's a key thing to remember. When you filter data using a relationship, the relationship is being used to say, I want exactly this. In other words, if this did work out, if I had a value within the attendees join table and it had a year value in it, which it's very easy for me to put in, I can always look a value up from events and copy it into attendees. I have to ask myself, do I want to duplicate that data? If you want to facilitate the filtering via the relationship, then yeah, it might be an okay thing to do. But with that filter right there, with the relationship filtering it, you're only getting just that data. In other words, once the relationship would be established via the global, you put in the year 2016, there was a year field in the attendees join table, and only those records from 2016 would be returned. But let's look at the alternative to that, which is a display-only filter. So the way that I think about portals is basically these two ways. The first way that I'm explaining right now is I can get that portal to show exactly what I want to show, nothing more, nothing less. That is a relationship filter, and you're using a portal for the purpose of display. And as I get rid of this, our alternative in this scenario, what we're going to do on today's lesson, is we are going to filter this portal based on the contents of this field, which is coming from one table away. So let's see how this is going to turn out. We're going to go into layout mode, and we are going to double click on the portal, and we're going to go through our options. So the one primary option that we're taking a look at that I was talking about is this one right here. Filter portal records. Now, it's very key that you understand this as a new FileMaker learner because it lends to the speed of your FileMaker database. When you use a relationship in order to get exactly what you want, FileMaker is only going to load those records according to that relationship. In other words, if I filtered to only get 2016 items from the attendees table, in this particular case, we could reference the events table, but it's a little bit more complex when you have to go one table away. Then those are the only records that will load. If there are 5 records, that's all there's going to be. If I choose this option right here of filter these portal records, now what comes up is a calculation dialog box. Now I can reference anything in my graph as long as there's a connection between all of the items. In this case, I have a connection to the attendees, and I also have a connection to the events. We see that when we look at the managed database. It's right there. Here's the connection. So if I'm looking at data coming from attendees, well, I'm actually looking at this particular field being shown from a portal that is based on this particular table. That option allows me to filter the relationship. So notice that I can make the selection here, and I can go to events, and I can make this particular portal only show items based on anything that's connected. So I'm going over to the events table, and I'm going to say if the name field contains something. And so in this case, I'm going to use a pattern count. And remember, on every calculation that FileMaker shows us, whenever the calculation engine comes up, we're always looking for this down at the bottom. What does the calculation result expect? What does it need to be? Well, in this case, it needs to be a Boolean. It's very important that you recognize this right here, that all non-zero values are true. Zero and empty values are false. That's a really key thing in terms of how FileMaker works, because you don't need to put in this if stuff, if pattern count. You don't need to go to that extreme. If pattern count is going to return a result, then that's a true value, according to what it says right down here. If it returns a 0, meaning it does not find any patterns, or it doesn't count any patterns, or if it's empty, then that's going to be false. So all we really have to do is put the pattern count in. That's all that we need. And what are we looking for? Well, we're looking within text, and we're looking at the name field. That's where the actual date currently is. That's the only place that it exists. What are we searching for? Well, I know that I'm looking at my record, so I'm just going to put in 2018 on this particular situation. And then we're going to say, OK. Now, here's the key thing. As I click OK, and we look at this one option, go into browse mode, and notice that the only record that's showing is DevCon 2018. In fact, when I switch to my other record, only his record of 2018 are going to show. So this right here is our second of two options where we can filter based on the portal. But here's the key takeaway for this particular lesson. Everything I told you about the relationship filtering, if I created a new global field and then established a new table occurrence and wired up a new connection, when I ask for just records for 2018, that's all that would be returned. FileMaker, when this database is loaded and goes across over to FileMaker server, is actually still retrieving all of the records that we don't necessarily see. This filter on this portal is only a display control. It only controls what FileMaker is going to display. So there's a big difference here. If you have a related set of data where, we'll use a hypothetical situation. Let's say you have an invoice, and for some reason, for some crazy reason, that invoice has 5,000 records. But you only need to see 10 of those 5,000 records. What's better? Setting up a relationship or using a filter on the portal? I'm going to argue that setting up a relationship is better because you're going to get just those 10 records returned, and that's it. With a filter, what's going to happen is FileMaker is going to retrieve it doesn't actually retrieve all 5,000 records. What it does is it recognizes how many rows there are in the portal that need to be displayed. So if there are 10 rows here, it fetches those 10 rows, and not just the field that actually is being shown. It retrieves all fields for that related record. So for all other fields that are not being shown, that data is being retrieved and is being pulled down from FileMaker server for 10 or however many rows are showing, and then a given number beyond that, because FileMaker needs to anticipate the scrolling action. As soon as you start to scroll this portal, FileMaker wants to be able to do that smoothly and be able to load those records. So it goes like, I've heard 20 or 25 beyond. So if this did display 10 rows, it would actually be going out and grabbing, let's say, 25 rows or, 35 rows. I don't know exactly. FileMaker engineers would know that, but I do know that that's how it works. So with the filter on this, you have to just remember all the rest of the records are being retrieved. They're just not being displayed. So the key takeaway here with this is a display level control. Using a relationship is a data level control where you control what is actually returned. Yes, it adds to the complexity of your database because you're adding globals and you're adding new table occurrences and new relationships. You, of course, need to manage that. It's not as simple as clicking this box, but it's a very key thing to know. In fact, it's probably the biggest thing you need to know about portals. All right, so the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Sorting portal records. I'm going to give you one of the best tips. In fact, that's why you're watching these videos. I'm giving you all of the inside tips. If you're sticking with me on these 30 minutes that we're spending, you're probably getting the best training that you can get because I'm giving you every piece of knowledge I have about things as we move forward, things that I've collected over 2 decades here. What I want you to recognize is this portal setup right now currently says I am able to sort. So I clicked on this. My portal, as we know, behind the scenes right here, this is displaying data from one table away. It's displaying data in my events table, or it's displaying a field of name from my events table. But the portal is the attendees portal because that's the attendance that a person is actually doing. There is a way to sort this based on the name, and it's not at all obvious. When I click this and I say, I want to sort this, and you're thinking, I want to sort this based on the name. I want it to go DevCon 2016, 2017, 2018, because otherwise the default presentation order for a portal is in the order in which records were created. Here's the trick, and FileMaker doesn't really tell you this, it's sort of hidden. You can temporarily make a switch and say, I want to show related records from events. And you're only doing this for the purpose of being able to do this. Click your Specify Now and notice that the Sort Records is now going to present fields from the table that is one away from where the portal is going to be displaying. So yes, FileMaker, I want to sort this by name. I can choose that, and it of course can be, I don't really need to explain this to you, ascending, descending, or custom based on a value list. Now a value list is the only way that you can control a custom order. And here comes the snafu. If your value list is using related values, that related value list always returns things in alphabetical order. We just don't have any control over that. I wish FileMaker would give us control. So if you do have a value list, or you know of the values that you want to be able to control, a custom value list, the exact same type that I've been suggesting that you don't use, is really the only way that you have explicit control over the order in which things are actually sorted on this particular dialog if you were to use this value list option. And again, it's just really not beneficial if FileMaker sorts everything for you and gives us no control. Now, this reorder based on a summary field is something that you can use. When you reorder, you're going to, of course, have to have a summary field. I have not used this a whole lot, a little bit obscure, but when you need it, you'll know. I think I've used it maybe a few times, just a handful of times. And then overriding the field's language for sort. This again has to do with the indexing. If you go back to one of my previous videos where we talk about field options, I believe, in the environment or in the data and structure series of videos, you can change this, say for example, from the native language of English to what we have down at the very bottom, which isn't showing currently because it's off screen, all the way down there, Unicode, if you wanted to sort things based on Unicode. And again, I'm going to refer you to that particular lesson. So once you say OK in that particular situation, what do? You switch your table back to the portal, to the table where the portal needs to display from. So now let's just click that sort again. Look at that. FileMaker, it doesn't allow us within this dialog box to actually make the selection from another table. We have to know that beforehand we have to select that other table, click the sort, then put the sort back. Little trick, super hidden, but super valuable. Something you need to know. Next item that we have, allow deletion of portal records. This option is an option that really only applies to the user interface. Let's go ahead and take a look at what might happen if I don't have this checked and we go in and look at our data. I'm actually going to take that filter off. I'm going to uncheck that because I want to see all of my records and see them in their sorted order. So look at that. We're on Bob Smith and it's perfect. It's sorted according to 2016, 2018, etc. In fact, if I put an A in front of this, it would sort as you expect. When I click out of this portal, this should go up to the top. Is it not sorting based on that? I thought I had it sort based on the name. I should double check myself. All right, I won't get distracted about that one. Let's click the delete button. If I select on this row and I hit the delete key, nothing happens. That's because the portal option of allowing deletion of records is not turned on, but it doesn't mean that you still can't delete records. Your scripts in FileMaker override almost everything. This button right here, when we take a look in layout mode, It's set to a simple step. It does not have a script, but if that script step did include this particular step of delete portal row, this single step or a script will override the setting on the portal. If I go into browse mode and I click delete and delete 2018, FileMaker will bring up the dialog, and for sure, it will get rid of that record. So the script overrides. Don't confuse this particular option in layout mode of allow deletion of portal records to be something specific to this portal. This is a UI feature that when it is selected, what a user is able to do is they are able to select on a row and then hit the delete key. And when you hit the delete key, that's when FileMaker is going to give you a prompt. But any script or any button with a single step on it, it'll override it every time. So that's a key thing to know about that particular option. All right, let's continue on. Allow vertical scrolling. This one is super obvious. This is what came about in later versions. It may have been 14 or 15, where we have the ability to turn off the scroll bar so that it only shows when scrolling. So this is really useful for a mobile solution when you're designing FileMaker Go. If you want your solution to not have the scroll bar on the side, then you are going to set this one right here, when scrolling. Otherwise, if you're designing something for the desktop, because of Windows, typically Windows, you still have people who do not have scrolling wheel mice. If your solution is going to be used on Windows, I always suggest using this always, unless you know that all the people in that company using Windows actually have scrolling mice. Otherwise, there's really no way to scroll. And so this is what I turn on for all of my desktop applications, unless I know for sure that the only people using it are Macintosh or it's for mobile. That's when I'll turn on the when scrolling only. And that's when it shows the really nice iOS look, where it's got just the bar that appears as you tap and slide. Now, this is something that I never set. Reset scroll bar when exiting record. Now, what this means is that if I do this, I won't have enough records actually right now. We would have to go in and create some records. And I'm running low on time, so I'm going to let you do that. Create a number of join tables, because currently in the interface, we do not have an ability to add related records. We can't click in here and type and add values because this is the event's name field, and we can't create a new event. We can only create an attendance to an event in our join here. So if you know how to solve it, go ahead and solve it. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until the next video. But the option that we're looking at right here, this reset scroll bar, what this does in particular is that if I scroll to record number 25, and then I click out of that portal, if that is a record commit event and the record is exited, the portal is reset and jumps back to record number 1. Without that checked, what happens is even though you click out and any commit that happens, it stays on record 25. So that was a very big annoying thing that was always the case. Now here's a key thing to take away about this. This only applies so long as you are on the current record. As soon as you move from this record to another record, here would be the example. If there were 25 or let's say 50 records, I had scrolled down this portal and a record down here at the bottom is up at the top. If I move to another record, all bets are off now. When I come back to this record, the portal will have reset and it will be back at record number 1. It will no longer be at the position where record number 25 is still showing. I wish it was the case because preserving state would be really good. That's how we operate as humans. I'm on Bob Smith. I was looking at his portal. I wanted to see records 20 through 25. I needed to go over, quickly check Matt, come back. Why can't I see 20 through 25 again? FileMaker just hasn't taken the time to put code in for portals to actually do that. All right, we only have a few more options. They are the formatting options that we have right here. Like we learned about with our repeating fields, if you go back to the lesson about the data and structure, and we look at field options and we look at repeating fields, it's specifically repeating fields if you want to search for that. Portals also have the ability to set an initial row and then have any other rows show. So in this case, if I wanted to do this, I could say I want to start at row 1 and I want to show rows 1 through 3. And then right next to it, I can make an exact copy of that portal. And you can see right here, FileMaker actually tells us we're showing from the attendees table, I have 1 through 3 could have more. There's a sort on this. All I have to do is double click on this copy and say, okay, FileMaker, I now want to show 4 through 6. And so this is how you can achieve, or not 4 through 9, I want to show 3 rows. That's what it is. This isn't a range of the initial row and then up to row. This is how many do you want to show. So sorry about that. But there you go. You can see I've got 1 through 3 and I have 4 through 6. And so now I would be able to have side-by-side data. It's really the only way that you can accomplish a horizontal effect is by limiting the number of rows that you do. And of course, whether or not these scroll, again, is basically up to you. So if you have a grid or a matrix that you want to present, you can definitely do that with portals as well as repeating fields. And portals are really beneficial because, again, you can display whatever you want within a portal as long as you remember you control the relationship. You can put key values into a global field. You can do all kinds of things in order to get a portal to display exactly what you want, not just for related records. And our final option is super obvious. We have the ability to use the alternate row state and use the active row state. Now I'll check this one on. Where is that actually controlled? Well, again, that is a formatting option that is controlled in your inspector. So as I zoom out here, we're going to have to bring the inspector on right here. And we can go to this third area, the appearance tab. And as that goes really big for me and I shrink it down so we can take a look in context here, we can see that with a row selected, we have the option to actually choose the portal row when we're going to style this object. With the portal row selected, we now have the options of primary, alternate, active, hover, and pressed. Now, hover and pressed really don't work pressed in particular really doesn't work. I don't know if it works at all or if that setting is on there. I've never really been able to get it to work successfully. Hover, I think, might work, but most of the ways that FileMaker developers tend to put a hover on is they will put a button that covers the whole row. That's an old style trick to do that. In fact, let's go ahead and set this hover on and see if we can set it to a different color. We'll just set it to an orange right here and see if we actually get that to work. But the alternate is really pretty easy. We can use an alternate gray, and then the active is always set to this default light little blue. I'll just set it to this really dark blue. Remember, be cautious when you choose super strong colors that will cause the requirement for an inversion of text color, because unless your fields are a solid fill, if they're transparent, if this field had a transparent look of none, and I zoom out here and I go to browse mode, what would be happening is when, there's the hover, it does work, cool. The pressed, though, I have not, see, I'm clicking right now and there is no pressed state on this. There's the active state, so that's what's happening when I'm going selecting and making it active, that active blue. But notice that when it's so dark here that my text, I'm not able to inverse that in the field. Now, I would be, with conditional formatting, able to actually make all of this text provided this was the primary selected record or selected row. And we'll have to save that for another time at another date. But there we go. The hover works. The alternate row state works. And it works really good when you've got a lot of rows that you're showing, if you've got a lot of financial data or things that you need to display. So there you go. That's pretty much everything that I know about portal options, inclusive of that really cool trick that you need to know of being able to temporarily switch your table occurrence that you point to in order to get a portal to sort based on data that is, you can do it many tables away if you need to. So that's going to bring today, in terms of the content, to a wrap. Let's see if we've got any questions that came in as I switch over to my video chat and bring those questions up. Probably have some hellos. There we go. Morning. Hello, Carol, Lee, HBH Group. Those of you that are checking in on a regular basis, I'm very grateful that you are. If you are not and you're watching this in a replay, go ahead and put your questions, if you have them, down underneath. We're right at 30 minutes, so we have plenty of time. It looks like Eric has a question over here, and that is, I have 2 portals from one join table on one layout. They show data based on a category. How can I set the category field to the right value on creation? How can I say? Okay. Here's an interesting thing. So I'm going to assume, Eric, you're talking about when a related record is created. There are a number of ways that you can accomplish this. And I would actually end up going into a complete other 30 minutes to explain what you can do, but we'll go through the quick version of this in terms of how you can actually do this. All right. So let's take a look at our relationship graph in the example that we've got here. There are a couple of other ways that you can create related records. FileMaker has this thing that I've always called, in the world of FileMaker, everybody's got different terms that they use for things. I've always called it FileMaker's obligatory create, where FileMaker is obliged to create a related record if it does not exist. So one of the ways to answer this is if you were dealing with a category situation where you wanted to create related records that by default had a given category, there's a number of ways that you can solve this. The first way that you could solve it, and probably the easiest, would be put an auto-enter calculation on the category field in that table, and then you can evaluate that auto-enter based on context through a relationship. So, in other words, if I created a category field within the attendees, which we can do right here, let's say for some reason we have a particular category of 2016 attendee, somebody who is a pass-only attendee versus a full course attendee that's going to do multiple. So we've just categorized our type of attendance to DevCon in this case. So the first way to do that would be to create an auto-enter calculation, which we've got right here, and you're going to do it based on the context. So the context, you can see this up at the top, which we haven't even gotten into, of this, evaluate this calculation from the context of. Now currently, I cannot actually change this because I don't believe, any other attendees tables on my graph. But let's see what happens when I add one. We'll say okay, and we'll go to my relationships, and that is the case. So I was indeed correct. I don't have any other attendees. Let's add another attendees temporarily, and now let's go look at that calculation again. That auto-enter on the category. Notice that what we have now, and this is a big lesson for another time, I now have the ability to establish the context under which this calculation evaluates. So right now, if I chose attendees 2 is connected to nothing. I just dragged a copy of that. So really, the only one that would make sense in context is attendees. So now that I have a mental picture of the context, and if I need to take a look at it, I can always choose Manage Relationships here and remind myself the context is attendees can see into people and it can see into events based on the relationships that it has. So the context in this regard would be, I want to use this particular table occurrence, and I'm going to zoom out here so I can click Close. And what do I want to get? What data do I actually want to have happen? Now, if in your people table you had a global field where you were dealing with a particular category and you wanted that to be the default, this is where you would be able to select that global field, and it would be, by default, the category that was selected in the global field. Now, that's just one way to solve this in terms of saying, I want to have them fall into the proper category. Another way to solve this would be via a relationship. You can actually have a separate table occurrence which has multiple predicates connected to it. I could have an ID, and then I could also have a global field. That global field that I told you about using an auto-enter, I could have a global field that also relates to the category. Now what I would do is on this relationship, this is the relationship that I would allow the creation of related records. And what happens is when a relationship actually uses all of the fields upon which you want to create a related record, that related record will be created with all of that criteria. So in this scenario, if I had that global field of category and it was a drop-down list or something, let's use my exact scenario. That drop-down list actually had the two different types of DevCon attendees. It could be a exhibits only versus a full course, and I had selected exhibits only. With that relationship in place, the extra predicate of the global field to the category, if I created the new related record through this table occurrence, and you have to do this in the user interface, you would have to have a separate way for the user to create records. So far as a FileMaker learner, we've only looked at the fact that it's the last portal row right here that's allowing the new record creation. We would either have to use a separate portal or a scripted button where that button goes through this relationship, not this relationship, and creates the related record. And by virtue of going through that relationship where the category is part of the connection, I'll just wire it up here even though it doesn't make sense, because those two fields are actually used via the relationship, the category field would be automatically pre-populated. So that's just, that's number 2 out of probably, if I had to guess, there's probably 3 or 4 other ways that you could still do this via scripting or what have you. That's just 2. One is the auto enter, and the other one is via the relationship or a separate relationship that's based on all of the fields that you want new records to be created on. Gosh, there's so many things that you could do. You could use a global or even a local variable and script it so that when the related record is actually created, it's created with a value. What would that look like? Well, let's go over to the attendees table. We've got this category field. This is yet another way. This is way number 3. I could actually have this value auto enter based on just a variable of category. Where and how would this actually get populated? Well, it would be within the context of your script. Your script or the button itself can set category to the value that you want, exhibit versus full pass, and when this related record is created, by virtue of the fact that it references this global variable or this local variable, whatever's in it would be the default category. And you can do it with a global variable as well. So if you have something that is set initially when the user comes into the user interface and they say, I'm dealing with all of the exhibit-only attendees, and that's set, and then they go on to do the rest of their work, well, if this particular field is supposed to use this global variable, it will use that global variable as its default when you create that new record. So that's 3 ways right there. Long answer, but I think worthwhile for those of you that are watching and that understand. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing for those of you that are newer. All right, let's see if there's any more questions. All right, great. Just FYI, one of your colleagues, JMO, gives a pretty good summary of the pros and cons regarding filtering portals via the portal relationship. Yep, there are a lot of videos out there on YouTube with regards to all of this. And Antonio, how's it going? All right, so I think that's going to give us a wrap for today's video. A nice little tight video about our portal options, what we can do, how we can get the portal to display what we want it to display and interact with it in the way that we want. That's going to give this video a nice little wrap as I wind up my music here. As always, you can check out more information at FileMaker Magazine, very reasonable subscription. You can subscribe right here if you want to be notified via YouTube, and the next video in this series will come up here. Also, if you're interested and you want to see the playlists, just click on my channel icon and you will find the playlists available to watch these in series. All right, see you later. Till next time.